Hello, this is Lindsay Clark. I am your primary instructor for current topics in medical laboratory sciences, and today we have lecture number 31, Policies and Procedures. So let's get started. The objectives for today's lecture: number 1, define policy and procedure and discuss the difference between the two. Number 2, list CLIA requirements for laboratory procedure manuals. Number 3, discuss the importance of procedures in the laboratory. And number 4, describe qualities that make a good standard operating procedure. So just real quick, here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start by defining policy and procedure and talking about the differences. We're going to talk about CLIA regulations for procedure manuals in the lab. When are they required and what must be included? And then we're going to talk about standard operating procedures. What types are there? Why are they important? What makes a good procedure? And then we'll talk about some tips for writing useful manuals as well. So, our terms and definitions. Policies and procedures are often used interchangeably, but they are really two different things. So a policy is a set of ideas or plans used by the organization as a basis for making decisions. A procedure, on the other hand, is a series of detailed steps to allow one to accomplish a certain task. What are the major differences between policies and procedures? Well, policies generally have a more widespread application than procedures. They may be organization-wide or sometimes they are department-wide, and they don't usually change very frequently. And policies tend to answer operational issues, and they will state what or why. And procedures have a more narrow application, and they are prone to change more frequently than policies. And procedures are usually written step by step and are more detailed. So they describe the process and state how, when, or who. And for this lecture, we're going to focus mainly on procedures, but I just wanted to clarify that while those terms are used interchangeably, sometimes they actually are different. Why are procedures so important in the lab? And why do we have a procedure for everything? Well, as is often the answer to these questions, CLIA. So CLIA requires a written procedure manual for all tests, assays, and examinations performed in the lab. And the procedures must be available to all laboratory personnel, and all laboratory personnel must follow these procedures. Now, per CLIA, textbooks can be used as supplemental material, but they cannot take the place of written procedures. And we'll talk about this later, but you also have to watch out for package inserts. Those can also not take the place of your written procedure. CLIA also mandates that all written procedures must be approved, signed, and dated by the current laboratory director before use. The lab director must also approve, sign, and date the procedure when any changes are made. Often, lab management as well as the pathologist will sign these documents, so a lot of times you'll see multiple signatures. And a copy of each procedure must be maintained in the lab with the dates of initial use and discontinuance. And these must be kept for at least 2 years after being discontinued. So what does CLIA require in a written procedure? Well, the written procedure manual must include requirements for patient preparation, specimen collection, labeling, storage, preservation, transportation, processing, and referral, and criteria for specimen acceptability and rejection. Now, a lot of the times you might have an overall procedure for specimen acceptability and rejection, but often those are found in individual test procedures depending on what is cause for rejection for that particular test methodology. Also required, procedures for microscopic examination. So if that's applicable to the test, those procedures must be included. And it must talk about how to detect inadequately prepared slides. So you certainly don't want to make any calls or report out any test results from a slide that is not adequately prepared. And the bulk of the procedure is usually this step number 3, and that includes step-by-step performance of the procedure. And that has to also include any test calculations necessary and interpretation of results. And the procedure must also contain instructions for preparation of slides, solutions, calibrations, controls, reagents, stains, and any other materials used in testing. If any calibration or calibration verification is required for the test, directions must be included in your procedure. The reportable range for test results should be listed for that specific test. Any control procedures required, as well as what corrective action to take when calibration or controls fail. If there are limitations in the test methodology, such as interfering substances, those must also be listed in your procedure. And the last slide of CLIA requirements for procedure manuals. Also included, you must have your test reference intervals or your normal values, as well as any panic or alert values. And these are often referred to as critical values. A list of references used to prepare the procedure or any pertinent literature references that may be useful. How the results are entered into the patient's record, and how patient results should be reported, including any protocols for reporting panic or alert values, should be in your procedure. And finally, a description of what to do if a test system becomes inoperable. In other words, sort of your backup plan if your analyzer goes kaput. Now, not all of these requirements will be in every procedure manual, but if they are applicable to that specific test, they must be included. And remember, CLIA is your minimum requirements, so your lab's accrediting agency might have more stringent requirements, so you always want to check those. You guys no doubt hear the term SOP in the lab. So SOP simply stands for Standard Operating Procedure. And it's pretty much synonymous with just procedure. So the EPA defines SOPs as a set of written instructions that document a routine or a repetitive activity followed by an organization. And then the laboratory definition is very similar, and it is documents that include step-by-step instructions that laboratory staff should meticulously follow when performing a procedure. You can categorize SOPs really into kind of 3 groups. So you've got administrative, technical, and your master SOP. Now your administrative SOPs can include procedures for quality assurance or management, maybe strategic plans, inspection or auditing procedures, office correspondence procedures, so maybe how you communicate or correspond with providers or nurses in your facility. It could also include things like documentation requirements. Now your technical SOPs include procedures like equipment upkeep, calibration, routine maintenance, test analysis, reagent or sample prep, quality control procedures, and pretty much any other procedure performed in the lab. And that can include things like collecting patient specimen, cleaning your laboratory draw room, disinfecting your bench after certain work procedures are performed, and so on. Now your master SOP is basically the SOP that tells you how to write SOPs for your lab. So the reason that this exists is it sort of standardizes your procedures across the lab. And so all of your procedures from department to department should be fairly similar. Usually they're in the same order and they have the same section headings. And that makes it easier, if you're in a department you don't work in a whole lot, makes it easier to be familiar with their procedure manuals. So why are procedures so important? Other than the fact that they are required by CLIA, procedures facilitate consistency between laboratory personnel. And that helps ensure test results are accurate. So consistency and accurate laboratory testing and results, that can lead to really quality laboratory services, and that is key for your patient outcomes. So ultimately, your SOP helps your laboratory personnel maintain that consistency and accuracy, maintain that quality, and you end up with your best patient outcomes. Procedures also facilitate communication between management, MLS, and MLTs, as well as laboratory support staff. They permit everyone to be on the same page, so to speak. So it also ensures that responsibilities are clearly communicated to laboratory personnel. And this is not just verbal communication, this is written communication. Procedures can also make cross-training easier, especially if your procedures are well written. So they allow staff to fill in and perform tasks that they normally don't do. They can fill in for any team members that are out sick or maybe on vacation, or maybe they're performing testing, covering them for lunch or whatever. Written procedures allow for consistent performance evaluation of staff. So required tasks and processes must be documented in order to hold lab staff accountable. So a lot of times you'll use these procedures for your annual competencies that are required. Procedures also contribute to a safer work environment. So they can reduce the odds of accidents or injuries. And if safety is written into the procedure, your laboratory staff are more likely to perform those tasks in a safe manner. It can also help with things, so we talked about disinfection of your bench after certain tests are carried out there. That can also help prevent any sort of contamination or anyone getting sick if everyone follows those procedures. What qualities make a good standard operating procedure? Well, SOPs should be concise. They need to be detailed and clearly written. They should be easily understood by those using them. If you're using a template to create your procedures, you need to make sure that all your CLIA required information is included, as well as anything required by your accrediting agency. Writing procedures really should be a team effort, and those that are performing this procedure daily should be encouraged to contribute since they are most familiar with the testing process. Also, again, package inserts are not SOPs. However, these can be incredibly helpful for writing your procedures. They do lack laboratory-specific information, and that's something that you would need to add in your procedure. Information and illustrations from package inserts can also be included in your procedure, especially illustrations can be very helpful. If you already work in the lab, you know that we have procedures for just about everything. But some examples of things that we might see procedures for include things like testing procedures, specimen receiving and processing, specimen storage, equipment, instrument, and analyzer upkeep and maybe routine maintenance, as well as troubleshooting, reagent preparation, dealing with complaints, and that might include sort of what we call writing up an individual or responding to someone who wrote you up. And then safety procedures are also seen in the lab, and they can include things like steps to take if you get a chemical in your eye. What do you do? Sometimes SOPs can be a pain to write and keep updated, but they do have many benefits. Having written procedures allows us to reduce our reliance on memory. So many of us are able to remember things we do every day, but we may not remember how to perform tests that are rarely ordered. Having that procedure is very beneficial in that situation. Procedures also help everyone to be trained in a consistent manner, and that minimizes variations in testing and ultimately promotes quality. Having your SOPs available in the lab fulfills your CLIA requirements and likely fulfills your accrediting agency requirements also. So just by having those procedures written and available, you are in compliance on that issue. And detailed procedures also allow for self-learning. So you can learn a whole lot by just reading the procedure before you even begin learning the hands-on testing process. If you read the procedure, learn the hands-on process, and then read the procedure again, you are really more likely to retain that information, to remember those details, and to perform the test according to procedure every time. Some of you may have already written procedures. Most of you will likely write at least one procedure in the course of your career. So, how do you write an effective procedure? Well, remember what your SOPs might be used for: training new personnel, reminding seasoned personnel of procedures they rarely perform, troubleshooting, testing problems, and a measure for staff evaluation. So keep these in mind when writing your procedures and try to make sure the procedure covers all the points necessary. One of the most important things to remember is to make sure all your CLIA requirements are included. Be sure to check the requirements for your accrediting agency as well. It is also helpful to organize your manual to be user-friendly. Using a 3-ring binder with tabs for each procedure helps staff find what they need quickly. And it can also be very helpful to include a table of contents. It's also highly recommended to put your pages in plastic page protectors to extend their life. So remember, these procedure manuals are probably going to be out on the bench where you're working. Body fluids could drip on them, super gross. If they're in plastic page protectors, that will allow you to wipe them off, to kind of clean them, sanitize them, and they can be put back up versus having to reprint that whole procedure every time you drip some urine on it. So I have an example procedure, and it is posted in Blackboard for you to print if you wish. I have also printed a 1-page excerpt from the CLIA Code of Federal Regulations that includes all of the requirements for procedure manuals. You can print that all out as well if you'd like. So what we're going to do, we're just going to walk through this procedure and kind of check out the different sections, but also kind of make sure that all the CLIA requirements are covered. So this is a procedure for a point-of-care urine pregnancy test. And the kit being used in this particular lab is the BioSign HCG new 1-step pregnancy test. So the first part of this procedure is the introduction, and it includes the purpose of the procedure and the staff that are permitted to perform the testing. Section 2 is the principle of the procedure, which essentially explains how the test works. Section 3 outlines your specimen requirements. Section 4 discusses health and safety, and Section 5 lists required equipment and instrumentation. So on this first page, the section on specimen requirements fulfills the CLIA requirement number 1 about specimen collection and acceptability. So page 2 of the procedure contains sections 6 and 7. Section 6 outlines requirements for reagents, standards, calibrators, and controls. And this section fulfills CLIA requirements number 4, 5, and 7. So number 4, CLIA requirement, preparation of slides, solutions, calibrators, and so on must be included. Number 5, your calibration and calibration verification procedures, and number 7, your control procedures. All those are required to be in your procedure, and they are included here. Section 7 is the step-by-step procedure for performing the test. This is CLIA requirement number 3. Step-by-step performance of the procedure must be included. Page 3 includes sections 8, 9, and 10. Section 8 outlines the limitations of the test. So the CLIA requirement number 9, which states limitations in the test methodology, including interfering substances, must be included. That is fulfilled by this section. Section 9 discusses recording and calculating results. So this section covers CLIA requirements 8 and 13. So number 8, corrective action to take when calibration or control results fail. And number 13, the laboratory system for entering results in the patient record, and so on. Section 10 covers your reference ranges, and this satisfies CLIA requirements number 6, which states the reportable range for test results must be included, and number 10, the reference intervals or normal values must be included. And finally, on page 4, so this page includes section 11, reporting and validation of results, and section 12, which includes the references. Now, CLIA requirement number 13, which states the laboratory system for entering results in the patient record and reporting patient results, is met with section 11, which talks about reporting of results. And requirement number 12 is actually fulfilled by section 12 in this procedure. And requirement number 12 requires that you include pertinent literature references in your procedure. So this is a short sample procedure, but it's a good example of a well-written procedure that fulfills all the necessary CLIA requirements. So you will notice, however, that CLIA requirement number 2 is not mentioned in this procedure. And the requirement number 2 is microscopic examination, including the detection of inadequately prepared slides. Well, that requirement is not applicable to this test. There aren't any microscopic examinations involved in this testing. So it is okay to leave that out if it is not applicable to that test. Also not included in this procedure, generally there's a signature page where your laboratory manager will sign off and date on that page, and usually any changes that are made, they will sign for that as well. So that's not included in this procedure, but do make sure if you're writing a procedure that you have that included and that your laboratory director does sign off and approve as well as date your procedures. So I just want you guys to be able to kind of go through your procedures and make sure if you're writing procedures in the future that you're able to correlate that procedure with your CLIA requirements or even your accrediting agency requirements. That way everything that you need to include is definitely included. So that brings us to the end of this lecture. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I know that we have Thanksgiving break coming up. I will likely be checking my email over the break, so please, if you have any questions, please let me know. And these are the references for today's lecture.